For better or worse, solo leveling has drastically increased the popularity of necromancers in Manhwa. And if you're anything like me, it's for the better. But don't get it twisted. I think we've all read countless stories that tap into necromancy or summoning that completely miss the mark, never leaning into what makes it so interesting and provocative in a way. The payoff of seeing something so small and tiny turn into something so great and powerful. A small skeleton turning into a fucking death knight. Things like that. Or like the MC getting a brand new summon altogether. Unfortunately, it often feels like summoning or necromancy stories are kind of just bolted on to the story that the author originally wanted to tell, that have nothing to do with necromancy or summoning. Only kind of a ploy to make the manhwa sell a little bit better. But what if I told you that there was a story that not only understood what we love about necromancer characters in video games or storytelling, but also understood why we keep reading all together. Everything from character growth to thrilling risk, with an enthralling dark world filled with all manners of evil, and a main character that is more than willing to get his hands dirty, with 94 chapters no less for your reading pleasure. Ladies and gentlemen, look no further than the strongest evolutionary necromancer. Kind of a lot, kind of a big name, honestly, but not as big as where you, anyways. All right, but before you scurry off to go read, don't get it twisted. This manhwa starts off really slow, but has a lot of tropes I think we all hold dear. The first one, of course, being pulled into a brutally hard video game as a villainous side character, no less, armed with nothing but the knowledge from the game and one OP skill to rule them all, with the main character settling on one core skill called evolution, which essentially allows him to evolve anything so long as certain requirements are met. Skills, objects, and items, along with, necromancer summons. And of course, the no-name character he inhabits happens to have a proclivity for dark magic, along with necromancy, but nothing else. He's kind of terrible at most things, besides those two. And the cherry on top, of course, this throwaway NPC that he inhabits is destined to die fairly soon. So the main character is tasked with getting as strong as humanly possible before the Academy entrance event kicks off. That's when the game starts. And all of the key and main characters come into play. The main character is actually a senior, meaning he's already going to school and doing all the classes, and yeah. One of my favorite parts about this story is that the main character is fairly ruthless right out the hop. Maybe ruthless is the wrong word. Frankly, he's a retired ex-soldier from Korea that was only able to escape the trauma of war by playing this brutally hard video game, the one he now inhabits. So of course, he wouldn't have a weak stomach or a weak will, and would already be overly strategic in a lot of his planning essentially. But before we get too caught into the specific things that make this story great, if you'd let me, I'd like to tell you one of the core things it does that might very well capture your heart and make you want to read it. But some of this stuff will sort of be spoilery, but not that much. Just kind of overall things that may be like, oh, I like that. Yeah, okay, now I'll read it. That kind of thing. But won't rob you out of the joy or surprise of finding out what those things lead to. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. But if that's too much for you and you want no spoilers, then do me this one favor. Try to make it past chapter 13. It's a little slow, it loses itself a little bit within those 9 chapters, I think, and then it wins you back. So just kind of push through those, and I think if you make it through that far, then you'll start getting into the real meat of this story. Okay, cool. Now, let's talk about some cool things. First things first is the main character has these 2 predicaments, and this is how he kind of solves them. One is a lack of income being a fallen noble, and the other is having an extremely weak body that can't keep up with his newfound sword training. So what does the main character decide to do? That's right, leverage his game knowledge of a core system. Alchemy, specifically potion crafting. He starts to leverage his knowledge of the future to craft a potion that keeps his stamina up and recovery up so that he can keep training, along with rebuilding his economic power from his fallen noble house. But he quickly realizes that alchemy is a lot harder to do when it's not as simple as hitting a button. But of course he doesn't give up and keeps pursuing it, only to encounter one of the very many female leads. A girl destined to be the alchemy queen herself in the future. Frankly, all of the female leads are really charming and fun, no weird tsundere nonsense here, thank God. And they're all cool in their own particular kind of way. Well, with one standing out above the rest by a lot, but More on that later. But the reason why I bring all this up is because the story continues to do this again and again, something really, really brilliant. Unlike other stories where it's like power-up after power-up or villainous fight after weird villainous fight, this story does an amazing job about sprinkling Easter eggs or references that it will later actually pursue and will applaud you for paying attention, and continues to create this feeling of kind of momentum. And it does that by sprinkling things here or there. Like for instance, that very same alchemist queen female lead, they sprinkle in that she's actually destined to die in the future because she is actually sick. But the main character mentions that there's a very complicated route that you can actually do to save her. But the ingredients that are required to do so are ungodly difficult to get. And the way the story makes you kind of fall in love with this quirky alchemist girl validates how badly you want him to get strong enough to be able to be eligible to get those ingredients. That's what I mean by like this splintering spiderweb that all leads to a bunch of different types of motivation. It's a really well-crafted story, especially if you like world building. More on that a little bit later. Another version of this is, you know, I told you how he started to training to become better at swordsmanship and needed to make potions to give himself more stamina and recovery so he could keep training his weak body. But what I didn't tell you is that the reason why he can do that is because the main character knows in the video game that he played that there was an Easter egg about this badass sword aura master who lived in the forest and trained swordsmanship day and night. But unfortunately, this old man only reached the pinnacle of swordsmanship in his later years. So as he became an aura master, the highest pinnacle of swordsmanship, he actually dies. So the main character ends up hijacking his body from a grave, reviving him, and being trained by this skeleton, because the skills are still the skills, even if the skeleton is debuffed because he's not the best in necromancy. But that right there is what I mean. They call upon this with the skeleton getting buffs later on, things like that. But like a crappier story would have just been like, he gets power-ups. Oh, you know, he was able to like take the mind power of the people he summons or something, or necromancer he necromances. Yeah, so now he just gets that power right now. It doesn't do that, and thank God. It adds a lot more fun with building out this character and actually having him earn it in a sense. And there's fairly good momentum in this story as far as like time moving fast. You don't feel like the character's stuck, which is awesome too. Anyways, that's just another one of those splintering things I think is pretty neat. Another reason to possibly read this wonderful story. Also, you're seeing the fantastic art in the background, so hopefully you're getting sold on what it is. I will say the art does get drastically better. The first 12 chapters are a little bit gritty, grainy, things like that. But yes, anyways, as much as these things are highlights for me, the one thing that this story does better than a lot that I've read, especially in contrast to Necromancer stories specifically, is world building. World building, especially when it comes to dark mages. In comes the Dark Mage meeting / conference thing. Here's a kind of TLDR setup of this whole cool moment that I think might persuade you to read it. The TLDR is that the main character somehow comes into possession of a badass artifact, one of the 7 deadly sins, this one happening to be gluttony. The MC happens to work under a necromancer master who is teaching him nothing and is kind of just a douchebag to him. The MC tells his master about having this artifact, and the master suggests we go to this dark conference. As they make their way to the conference in the dead of night, every single dark mage is hunting them for this fabled artifact. And of course, we are introduced to a handful of amazingly awesome characters, and some of which are sinisterly evil, like sinisterly evil. And in comes a beautiful psychopath, a man that only values 2 things: the pursuit of knowledge and a man that keeps his promise. He loves these things so much so that the kingdom has largely marked him as an enemy. But he is so ungodly broken that nobody can really oppose him. This is Solomon, a dude covered in badass tattoos with a senile smile that is a walking fucking apocalypse. This is awesome. As the main character is being sieged, Solomon shreds them all with one single spell. He doesn't do this for no reason. He kind of knows the main character's dad, some backstory things, and because the main character gave Solomon a ride on his coachman to the dark magic meeting, he promises him a favor. A favor the main character immediately cashes in when he enters the meeting, shows people the artifact of greed held by his necromancer summon, and then quickly tells the summon to go back into his portal, and then, like a total fucking psycho, the MC stabs himself in the heart, essentially holding himself and the artifact ransom. The main character essentially tells his master to go fuck himself and demands that he get compensated for giving them such a powerful reward. And they do just that. They give him some amazing new summons to eventually be able to summon. He's not at the skill level to really be able to do it, but he takes them nevertheless. I don't want to spoil those summons, but needless to say, the main character looks at Solomon, the absolute powerhouse, and tells him to get him the fuck out of there. And he does. Everything makes sense, is a bad badass moment where the main character shows how absolutely willing to put his life on the line and do some intense shit to get a little bit more power, which he needs to survive. It is awesome. It also introduces a really cool character like Solomon, who will literally do anything he has to do if he is promised to do it, or if he owes you a favor, even if that's betraying a king, or even something more sinister like doing a fucking horrible job, like hurting someone who doesn't probably deserve it, so on and so forth. A really interesting kind of character that at least you can understand, which is cool, if that makes any sense. Anyways. I remember being on the edge of my seat reading this, and it was refreshing to see an MC know what had to be done and didn't hesitate. He had a plan, albeit a little crazy, and he followed it to the letter, and the plot didn't demand that it failed. Quite the opposite. It almost deserved to succeed because of what he put on the line to get it. And the result was awesome. Something to look forward to in the coming chapters when he finally gets strong enough to summon these fantastical creatures and build his kind of badass necromancer army. This is kind of what I mean when I say the story gets it. It understands what we want, and it constantly meets our expectations as well as elevates them. The best way I can kind of try to describe it is the story utilizes a lot of generic things. The main character happens to use a katana of all things and happens to be a spell sword essentially, but it knows how to make those things really, really interesting. Which I think a lot of the stories we read are just people like jotting down checkboxes like, yeah, spell sword, check, gets power, check, necromancer, check, but doesn't develop these things or know why people love them or find them interesting. And I think this story does. In fact, the only thing I don't think people would really connect with this story is that it is a little slow. It takes its time to build, and it doesn't constantly bombard your brain with dopamine and like interest of like, get a power up, get a power up. This is now a harem anime. Here's a new heroine. Here's a new main lead. Here's so on and so forth. It slows down and takes it time to develop things, and I find that charming, and I hope you do as well. Unfortunately, this is kind of my limit for spoilers. There is so many things that happen in between this, and this was only 2 fun moments that I thought made the story shine in a very particular and interesting kind of way. The main character feels like he's growing at the right pace and continually making progress, and also becomes ever increasingly more powerful, especially throughout the course of the 40 chapters you read. It's not slow in that way. Frankly, if you want some sort of rating for the story, I give it an A+. Definitely worth reading. But as you might be able to see, there's still plenty of the video left. So what do I have left to say? Well, I have some stuff that I think are awesome and would definitely continue to sell you on this story, and if you're a person that's like me who believes that spoilers don't exactly exist unless it's a fundamental twist and that's the whole thing that makes the story, and instead the story's meaning and impact is in the execution of that story, me knowing the cool points of it doesn't make me want to read it any less. So if you wouldn't mind hearing me talk a little bit longer, I'll tell you some of those cool things. But if not, if that's all you need, then toodles. But you and me, let's keep talking. Frankly, I rolled my eyes a little when I found out that the main character was going to be pursuing swordsmanship and aura training. But man, I was surprised. Oh my god, it is so much fun, especially in later chapters when he eventually gets trained by a special kind of badass. But the thing that really sold me on the main character's development using a sword is when he describes it like this: an irresistible state where he would want to live forever. All the while, every blood vessel and tendon screaming at him to leave what he calls an aura field, or something like that. It's such a cool idea of a place. If anyone's ever exercised and gotten to that sweet spot of, oh my god, this feels so refreshing and yet my body is screaming at me, it just kind of made me smile. And the way they do the art, it just, you totally get it being like this peaceful place. And to me, it just resonates so hard with anyone who exercises, because yeah, after an exercising, you get this nice clarity. I digress. The only thing I'm kind of disappointed with, like super disappointed with, is guess what sword he has? Yep. 'Tis a katana. Another katana. More katanas. They couldn't do a saber. They couldn't do anything, man. Give me a dagger at this point. I don't care. Just anything that's not a katana, please. Anyways, it is a katana. It's cool. It's like a meteor katana. It's black. It's cool. He essentially gets a sealed weapon that eventually unlocks. Again, this is expert storytelling for introducing a thread and then having it pay off later. A reason to keep reading, a reason for him to get stronger, and not just for it to fall on the main character's lap. Well done, author. This might be low-hanging fruit, but holy shit, this is what we deal with constantly in Manhwa land. Even more in manga land, frankly. Alright, another thing that was really cool to me is that the main character essentially becomes a vessel for the 7 deadly sins, getting stronger with each coming power-up, like a lot stronger. It makes the character's power-ups seem a little bit more believable, and makes the ending all the more irresistible, considering what it all implies. I mentioned it a little bit at the beginning, but one of my favorite parts about this story is the female leads, the main heroines of the story, of course, with one of them taking the main spotlight, and oh my god, is she badass. This is this tall, berserk, green-haired lady that is awesome. Not only was her story of why she connects and loves the main character so quickly and so much make all the sense in the world if you've seen it, but the fact that she is not this loud, boisterous, blah 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 kind of character, but instead is quiet, loyal, and stoically badass is just unbelievably sick and refreshing, frankly. For me, she kind of feels like a mantra of a little goes a long way. Every time she's shown to care so much about the MC. And it just makes sense why she cares as well, which is a thing that we don't often get in manhwa or manga stories. I digress. The coolest part about the story that I keep coming back to the more and more I think about it is this. It just pushes against generic parts of most stories that we read. For example, the main character in no small part befriends some really dark and sinister people. People who no doubt have done terrible, terrible things. And yet, those terrible people are willing to help him. And if the world is coming to an end, you'd better fucking take their help. Something that comes to mind that articulates this in a good way is when he meets with a representative for one of the dark factions. An old man that looks like he's infested with bugs or just holding back pure evil behind his eyes. Often followed by two gigantic dark knights. But the coolest part is how this old man backs the MC. Not to mention how awesome it is. It's just a nice twist that the big villainous guy, for whatever reason, backs our main MC, and it kind of makes sense if you pay attention to the story and the subliminal hints. I digress. Another thing that's really nice is that the MC doesn't actually want to tear down the Dark Guilds, but instead simply wants to control them, giving them greater direction if anything. It's definitely not a story with a happy-go-lucky hero, but not a sinisterly evil MC who's edgy as hell and wants to see the world destroyed for what they did to him. If anything, it's just like a very pragmatic approach to an MC, which is cool. He's not needlessly evil or unnecessarily cruel. He just kind of does what needs to be done for the betterment of the world, which you may not always agree with, but at the very least, you can kind of understand, which is nice. Another thing that kind of comes with this whole idea of pushes against generic storytelling is a lot of times things happen for plot-driven reasons, meaning things fall into the MC's lap, things kind of just work out, female leads, for whatever reason, love the MC for not a good enough reason to fall in love with an MC. None of that exists here. At least not to me. All the reasons seemed understandable for why the characters do what they do, why characters act the way they act, why characters may forgive him because they imply that they may know his father, which makes them hesitate. All these things kind of add up to make sense for why things happen in this world. And that's not what we get in a lot of these stories, unfortunately. It's kind of just like, turn your brain off, enjoy it, and shut up. And this one's like, no, it makes sense. It kind of adds up, which is really, really awesome and hella refreshing. The one final thing I could tell you about this story that I think will be really nice for some, but maybe worse for others, is that this does feel like a longer story. There are certain manhwa out there that exist, some of the most popular ones, that feel like you just burn through a chapter in a blink of an eye. But this one takes its time. It doesn't feel too fast. If anything, it feels like the chapters go on for legit longer, like there's just more art and such, which is probably why it takes a long time to get updated despite it having 94 chapters. But it definitely doesn't feel too fast-paced, which could be awesome for people who are sick and tired of more dopamine, more stimulation. He gets this power, he gets this, he attains the new female lead, If you want a break for something that breathes and has fun still, I think this story is fantastic for that, but it is a little bit longer. Specifically, I think it is perfect for you who is still listening. Alas, I hope you go give it a read wherever you can find it. My name is Grin. I hope I can see you again. Thank you kindly for letting me talk to you about stories, and I hope you let me tell you about them again. Enjoy the story, and goodbye for now, my friends.